Today marks the deadline for the ANC to hand over its cadre deployment committee records to the Democratic Alliance. This after the Gauteng High Court in Johannesburg dismissed the governing party's appeal bid last week Tuesday. Our reporter Canny Maphanga joins us in studio with more. Canny, a good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been a really interesting conversation, right? Because I think there's a big conversation around just the legality of cadre deployment across the board, really. But let's start with the background, right? How we got here, where the DA said no cadre deployment needs to be dealt with.
Well, good morning to you, Naledi, and the viewers at home. Of course, where it begins is the Democratic Alliance, and I think we can zoom into Dr. Leon Schreiber, a Member of Parliament who, I guess, has oversight over these public enterprises. He lodged an application in terms of PIA, that's the Promotion of Access to Information Act. On two grounds, he was successful, stating that it was a transparency issue and that because he performs oversight, he needs to have access to these records. On those two grounds alone, he was successful in the Gauteng High Court in Johannesburg to get that order saying that within 5 days, the complete records, which is the WhatsApps, the minutes, the CVs, etc., must be handed over to the DA. Of course, the ANC rushed to the Gauteng High Court in Johannesburg to appeal that ruling in an extempore judgment last week Tuesday. As you've correctly stated, the Gauteng High Court found that there was no reasonable prospect of success. So that's what brings us to where we are today, the deadline. The DA's interpretation of that extempore judgment is that 5-day deadline still stands, and from Tuesday up until today, they have until the end of the working day to submit those records.
What happens if the ANC then does not hand those records over?
Well, the ANC has options. They are obliged to carry out the terms of that order, unless, of course, we have had a conversation with legal analyst Benedict Perry. They would have to seek some sort of indulgence from the DA if they needed more time to hand over those records. I doubt that would be successful, as that forms part of a bigger bid of the DA to declare cadre deployment itself, the long-standing policy of the ANC, unconstitutional in the Gauteng High Court in Pretoria. So there's several applications dealing with this matter, and judgment is reserved in that matter. They also have the option to head to the Supreme Court of Appeal to seek relief there if they choose to do so, or they can hand over those records by the end of the working day today.
Yeah, and have we heard from the ANC at all at this point what their intention is going to be?
Well, we spoke to the ANC last week. They said they were still studying what the terms of the order meant and if they had possible legal recourse. We'll be following up with the ANC throughout the course of the day to determine what decision they've made regarding these records, as well as the DA, if they're not in possession of these records by the end of the day, what their next course of action will be, which will most likely be a contempt of court application.
Yeah, and I imagine that it is a conversation that we take forward at the close of business today, right? And that's when we'll know what stance the ANC certainly has taken. But I think there's something to be said about just the sort of precedence that this really sets for a country that is also heading into national elections next year, where there is going to be a discussion around how political parties do deploy leadership, right? And I mean, let's talk a little bit about what you're hearing, even from analysts, and perhaps some opinions that you're getting around what cadre deployment really means and how it impacts South African politics and deployment moving forward.
I think it's largely an issue about transparency. And then, of course, with the state-owned enterprises, we are looking at a very difficult period in South Africa. We're seeing the state-owned enterprises not quite delivering what they're supposed to deliver. Now, the DA has contributed or attributed this root failure of these state-owned enterprises to this long-standing policy. But it'll be interesting to see how this extends to political parties as a whole, because remember, when we speak of judgment, it's the principle that will emerge from it, and it'll apply to all political parties if the DA is successful in making this deployment unconstitutional, or this policy unconstitutional. Then it means going forward, when political parties are, I guess, elected to govern and they have these mandates to deliver, and they need to put people that they trust to carry out those mandates in those state-owned enterprises. How do you approach it if this policy, a long-standing policy, has been made unconstitutional?
Well, we'll be watching close of business this afternoon to see what the ANC does, and I imagine we'll be chatting about it tomorrow as well. Canny, thank you so much for that.